If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell to stay updated with our latest tales. Share this with your friends and family to spread the magic of storytelling. Your support keeps us going. Thank you.
The sun shone brightly over the small town of Willow Creek, where the grandest wedding the town had ever seen was about to take place. The DuPont twins, Eleanor and Eliza, were the talk of the town. Identical in appearance but vastly different in spirit, the sisters had always been close, sharing secrets no one else could ever know. But this secret, this one would change their lives forever. Eleanor was set to marry Lord Vincent Harrington, a wealthy but cold man her father had chosen for her. It was an arrangement of status, not love. Eliza, on the other hand, had quietly fallen for James, a humble artist who lived on the outskirts of town. Their meetings had been in secret, their love hidden from prying eyes. The night before Eleanor's wedding, the twins sat together in her room. Eleanor's hands trembled as she held her wedding gown. "I can't do this, Eliza," she whispered. "I can't marry a man I don't love." Eliza placed a hand on her sister's. "Then don't. Let me go in your place," she said, her voice steady. Eleanor blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'll marry Lord Harrington." "He doesn't love you, Eleanor. He wants the DuPont name." "He won't even notice the difference," Eliza said, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "And you can be free. You can go, Eleanor. Run away, find your own happiness." The sisters spent the night planning their daring switch. Eliza learned the vows and the mannerisms Eleanor would need for the ceremony. Eleanor, with a heavy heart but a glimmer of hope, packed a small bag. She was going to find her own path, away from the gilded cage of her family's expectations. The morning of the wedding was a whirlwind. Eliza stood in Eleanor's place, the veil covering her face as she walked down the aisle. Lord Harrington, oblivious to the switch, looked as stoic as ever. The ceremony went off without a hitch, and soon Eliza found herself as Lady Harrington. Eleanor, meanwhile, had slipped away to meet James. They planned to leave Willow Creek together, a new beginning in a far-off place where love, not duty, would guide their lives. But secrets have a way of unraveling. That evening, at the grand reception, Lord Harrington noticed something. His new bride's laughter was lighter, her smiles more genuine. She spoke with a passion and warmth Eleanor had never shown. Suspicion flickered in his cold gray eyes. By the time the first dance ended, he confronted her. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice low but sharp. Eliza froze, her heart pounding. "I'm your wife," she said, her voice trembling. "No, you're not," he hissed, his grip tightening on her arm. "Eleanor never looked at me the way you do. Tell me the truth." Meanwhile, Eleanor and James had just reached the town's edge when word spread of an uproar at the Harrington estate. A servant, overhearing the confrontation, had pieced together the truth. Chaos ensued as the gossip spread like wildfire. Back at the estate, Eliza stood her ground. "You're right," she said finally, lifting her chin. "I'm not Eleanor, but does it matter? You never loved her? You don't even know her." Lord Harrington's face darkened. "And what of her? Where is she?" Eleanor's absence became the talk of the town. Search parties were formed, and the DuPont family was thrown into scandal. Lord Harrington, torn between anger and intrigue, found himself oddly drawn to Eliza's boldness. As Eleanor and James tried to disappear into the night, their path was blocked by someone unexpected. Lady Agatha, Lord Harrington's sharp-eyed aunt, who had been secretly following them. "You thought you could just run away?" Lady Agatha said, her voice calm but cutting. Eleanor's face paled. "Please, Lady Agatha, let us go. I can't go back to that life." Lady Agatha studied them for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps there's a way for everyone to get what they want," she said cryptically. Back at the estate, Lord Harrington and Eliza were locked in a battle of wills, their arguments sparking with unexpected chemistry. As Eliza challenged his every word, he found himself questioning everything he thought he wanted. But just as the tension reached its peak, the doors burst open, and Lady Agatha entered, with Eleanor and James in tow. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the twins, identical yet so different in that moment. "You two have caused quite the mess," Lady Agatha said, her voice laced with amusement. "But perhaps it's a mess worth sorting." Everyone held their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Lady Agatha, ever the orchestrator, stepped into the center of the room, her commanding presence silencing whispers that had begun to rise. She looked at each twin carefully, her expression unreadable. "Well," she began, smoothing her gloves, "I suppose we have a dilemma to resolve. A bride who isn't who she claims to be, a groom who's just discovered the farce, and a runaway with a lover of no standing." She let her gaze sweep over the room, daring anyone to interrupt. "I have a solution, but it requires absolute honesty from everyone involved." Eleanor's hands tightened around James's arm as she stepped forward. "Please, Lady Agatha," she said softly. "I only wanted to escape a life I couldn't endure. Eliza didn't mean harm, she only wanted to help me." Lord Harrington's cold eyes darted to James. "And this man?" he asked, his voice sharp. "He's your escape plan?" James, though intimidated by the grandeur of the estate and the power of those surrounding him, held his head high. "I love her," he said simply, "and I'll do whatever it takes to make her happy." Lord Harrington scoffed, but before he could respond, Lady Agatha held up a hand. "Enough. You've all made your choices, rash as they may be. Now it's time to face the consequences." She turned to Lord Harrington. "Vincent, are you truly so invested in this marriage, or was this merely a business deal for you?" He hesitated. The truth was, Eleanor, or rather Eliza, had surprised him. There was a fire in her spirit he found strangely captivating, something he had never felt toward the real Eleanor. But to admit that would mean revealing vulnerability, something he had spent years guarding. "I agreed to this marriage for the alliance," he said finally. But his eyes flicked to Eliza. "Perhaps it isn't as simple as I thought." Eliza's heart skipped a beat, but she masked it with a defiant look. "Don't mistake my actions for an attempt to win your affection," she said. "I only stepped in because I couldn't bear to see my sister trapped." Lady Agatha arched an eyebrow. "How noble of you," she said dryly. Then she turned to Eleanor and James. "And you two? What exactly do you plan to do if I let you leave?" Eleanor faltered. "We'll find a way to live," she said. "Somewhere far from here. We don't need wealth or titles, just a chance to be together." The room buzzed with murmurs, the scandal brewing thicker by the moment. Lady Agatha sighed. "Love," she said almost mockingly, "such a fragile foundation for a life." "And yet it's more than any of this," Eleanor shot back, her voice trembling but firm. Lady Agatha studied her, then nodded, as if she had decided something. "Very well, here is what we'll do." She glanced at Lord Harrington. "Vincent, you will annul this marriage immediately. Clearly, you and Eliza are ill-suited." "Annul?" he repeated, stunned. "Yes," she said firmly, "but before you protest, consider this, you will not leave empty-handed. A match can still be made, one that benefits both your family and ours. You'll have your alliance." He frowned, but didn't argue. Lady Agatha turned to James and Eleanor. "As for you two, I will grant you safe passage out of Willow Creek, provided you leave tonight and never return. If you agree, I will ensure your journey is comfortable and discreet. But if you refuse, I'll make sure every door is closed to you, and you'll find no refuge anywhere." Eleanor's breath caught. This was her chance, but it came with a price. She glanced at James, whose steady gaze reassured her. "Agreed," she said softly. "And me?" Eliza asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Lady Agatha smiled faintly. "You, my dear, will have to decide. Stay here and face the consequences of your deception, or leave with your sister and her lover." Eliza's heart ached at the thought of abandoning the life she had briefly tasted. Yet staying meant facing Lord Harrington, who now regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and something else she couldn't quite name. "I'll stay," she said finally, surprising even herself. Lady Agatha clapped her hands. "Good." Then it settled. She glanced at the gathered crowd, her expression daring anyone to challenge her. "The rest of you may go. There's nothing more to see." The guests dispersed reluctantly, leaving only the key players in the room. Eleanor hugged Eliza tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. Eliza forced a smile. "Be happy, Eleanor. That's all I want." As Eleanor and James departed under the cover of night, Eliza turned to face Lord Harrington. He was silent, his gaze unreadable. "So," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her heart. "What now?" His lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Now, we see what kind of trouble you really are." The tension crackled between them, and though neither would admit it, they both felt the pull of something unexpected. In the quiet that followed, Lady Agatha's words echoed in Eliza's mind. "Love may be fragile, but it's not always weak." This was far from over. Eliza stood in the vast hall of the Harrington estate, the silence heavy around her. The warmth of the grand chandelier above did little to ease the chill creeping up her spine as she faced Lord Harrington. His enigmatic smile lingered as if he was testing her resolve. "What kind of trouble I am?" Eliza asked, arching a brow. "You might find out you're not prepared for the answer." Lord Harrington's smile faded into something sharper. "A bold claim. Boldness is dangerous in the wrong hands, Miss Dupont. Or should I say Lady Harrington, at least for now." Her heart clenched, the annulment loomed over her, and though she had agreed to stay, the uncertainty of her place here gnawed at her. She refused to let him see her fear. "I don't need your approval to stay," she said, lifting her chin. "I only stayed to ensure Eleanor had the freedom she deserved." "Of course," he said smoothly, his tone unreadable. "But now that you're here, don't think I'll let you do as you please. This estate has rules, and so do I." "Rules are made to be bent," she shot back, unable to stop herself. A flicker of something like admiration crossed his face, but it was gone before she could be sure. Lady Agatha, who had been watching the exchange with a faint smirk, clapped her hands. "Well, this promises to be endlessly entertaining, but do try not to burn the house down, you two." "Vincent, a word?" Lord Harrington followed his aunt out of the room, leaving Eliza alone. She released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. In the days that followed, the tension between Eliza and Lord Harrington only grew. She quickly learned that he wasn't as cold as he seemed, though his sharp wit and guarded nature made him difficult to read. He seemed determined to test her patience at every turn, assigning her tasks meant to humble her, overseeing the staff, managing the household accounts, and even organizing a dinner for visiting nobility. But Eliza wasn't one to back down from a challenge. She met every task head-on, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her struggle. One evening, as she reviewed the guest list for the upcoming dinner, she found Lord Harrington watching her from the doorway. "Do you ever take a break?" he asked, his tone almost amused. "Do you?" She shot back without looking up. He stepped into the room, the faint scent of cedar and leather following him. "I'm curious about you, Eliza," he said, his voice softer than usual. She set down her quill and met his gaze. "Why? Because I'm not afraid of you." "Because you're not like anyone I've ever met," he admitted. Her breath caught, but she quickly masked her surprise with a wry smile. "Careful, Vincent. That almost sounded like a compliment." "Don't let it go to your head," he said, though there was a flicker of warmth in his eyes. For a moment the room felt smaller, the space between them charged with unspoken tension. But before either could say more, Lady Agatha appeared in the doorway. "Vincent," she said briskly, "a messenger just arrived. There's trouble in the village. You're needed immediately." He straightened, the warmth vanishing from his expression. "What kind of trouble?" "Bandits," Lady Agatha replied. "They've raided the grain stores and set fire to the mill." "I'll handle it," he said, already heading for the door. Eliza hesitated, then stood. "I'm coming with you." He paused, turning to her with a frown. "This isn't your fight." "Maybe not," she said, meeting his gaze. "But I'm not sitting here while people suffer. If you don't want my help, that's your choice, but I'm coming either way." For a moment, he looked as though he might argue, but then he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but stay close." The village was in chaos when they arrived. Flames licked at the edges of the mill, casting eerie shadows across the frightened faces of the villagers. Men and women scrambled to save what they could, while children huddled together, their cries piercing the night. Lord Harrington immediately took charge, barking orders to his men and organizing the villagers into groups to fight the fire and secure the remaining grain stores. Eliza, refusing to be a bystander, joined the effort, helping to carry water and comfort those who had lost everything. At one point, she found herself face to face with a young boy clutching a tattered doll. His wide, tear-filled eyes tore at her heart. "Where's your family?" she asked gently. "Gone," he whispered, his voice trembling. She knelt before him, her throat tightening. "You're not alone," she said. "I'll make sure you're safe." By the time the fires were extinguished and the bandits had fled, dawn was breaking over the village. Exhausted but determined, Lord Harrington and Eliza stood side by side, surveying the damage. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. Their eyes met, and for the first time, she saw something in his gaze she hadn't expected: respect. In the days that followed, the events in the village seemed to shift something between them. Though they continued to bicker, their exchanges carried an undercurrent of mutual understanding. Eliza began to see past Vincent's cold exterior, glimpsing the man beneath, the one who cared deeply for his people, even if he rarely showed it. But just as they began to find common ground, a letter arrived that threatened to upend everything. It was from Eleanor. Eliza read the letter with trembling hands, her heart sinking with every word. Eleanor and James had been caught in a neighboring town. The local magistrate, suspicious of their lack of proper papers, had detained them, and they were now facing charges of theft, false but damning without proof of their innocence. Eliza immediately showed the letter to Lady Agatha, who read it with a frown. "This complicates things," she said. "You have to help them," Eliza pleaded. Lady Agatha's sharp eyes softened. "I'll do what I can, but it may not be enough. Vincent will need to intervene." Eliza felt a pang of guilt. She had sworn to protect Eleanor, and now her sister was in danger because of her. When she told Vincent, his reaction surprised her. Though he sighed heavily, he didn't argue. "We'll leave at first light," he said. "We?" she asked, startled. "You think I'm letting you handle this alone?" he replied, his tone firm. Her chest tightened with gratitude. "Thank you." The journey to the neighboring town was fraught with tension. Eliza's mind raced with worst-case scenarios, and though Vincent remained calm, she could sense his unease. When they arrived, they were met with hostility from the local authorities, who were reluctant to release Eleanor and James without substantial proof of their innocence. It was Vincent who ultimately turned the tide, using his influence and connections to secure their release, but the victory was bittersweet. Eleanor and James were free, but the ordeal had taken its toll on them both. As they prepared to return to Willow Creek, Eleanor pulled Eliza aside. "I'm sorry," she said, tears in her eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "It's not your fault," Eliza said, hugging her tightly. "We'll get through this, together." But as they made their way back to the Harrington estate, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were far from over. The story of Eleanor's escape and Eliza's deception had spread, and the once whispered rumors were now a full-blown scandal. The DuPont family's reputation hung by a thread, and the pressure on Eliza to leave the Harrington estate grew stronger by the day. Yet despite the odds, Eliza and Vincent found themselves drawn closer together. Their mutual respect had deepened into something neither dared name, though it lingered in every glance and unspoken word. One evening, as they stood together on the estate's balcony, Vincent broke the silence. "You're not like anyone I've ever known, Eliza," he said quietly. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "Neither are you," she admitted. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Then, before either could speak again, a servant appeared with urgent news. "Lord Harrington," the servant said, "there's been a development. Lady Agatha requests your immediate presence." As they hurried inside, the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on them both. Whatever awaited them, Eliza knew one thing for certain: her life would never be the same, and in her heart she knew the story was far from over.